Hey, folks, welcome to another edition of the Processing Blue podcast, a Panthers podcast, in case you're unfamiliar. I am Panthers beat reporter Mike Kaye, joined by fellow Panthers beat reporter Alex Zietlow for the Charlotte Observer.
What's
Wonderful
up?
website.
Yeah.
You might have heard of it. We are here after 2 weeks of some pretty chippy and competitive training camp practices. Alex, you're basically celebrating your 1-year anniversary of being on the beat. I'm just curious, as we get into this, let's start off right off the bat. What's your biggest takeaway on offense in training camp?
Well, biggest takeaway of my career in covering the NFL, that's wow, I can't believe I've been in it for a year. I can't believe that the NFL machine works like this. And like I told people at this event last night, you really truly need to go through a season to know what your eyes can and can't tell you come training camp. In other words, some things could be misleading. Some performances could be misleading. Others could be quite insightful. And that's kind of what I've taken from that first training camp that I did to this one. One thing that I've noticed, one takeaway that I think is insightful and will be insightful onto the season is that Jonathan Mingo is a new guy. He is a different player than he was last year. I'm staking my claim right now, Mike. That's what I'm doing. I know you look super enthralled when I said all that. This guy he's just, I don't know exactly what it is. Maybe you can articulate it better than I can, but he looks healthy. He looks happy. The ball is coming to him. He is open on these double moves. On the one-on-ones, he looks impressive. In 11s, he's getting targets. He is matching Bryce Young's creativity when Bryce gets out and has to do his thing outside the pocket. I think the biggest takeaway is this wide receiver room has been upgraded, and it's a lot of it is thanks to Jonathan Mingo.
Yeah, I think, when you talk about Jonathan Mingo, last year he kind of struggled as a route runner. He was used mostly as a Z receiver, which was not a position he played a lot at Ole Miss. Mostly had success in the slot. Didn't make a lot of excuses, kind of took the criticism and just kind of bared with it. But I do agree. I mean, even today, we're recording this on a Tuesday, he had a double move in the corner of the end zone off a fade ball.
Gorgeous
play. He looks very refined as a route runner. I guess for me, I think the biggest takeaway for me is that Bryce Young is being allowed to be Bama Bryce, as I like to call him. If you're familiar with the show, if you're familiar with my radio appearances, I call him Bama Bryce whenever I see him create off schedule, because that's what he was known for at Alabama. That's why he won a Heisman Trophy. We're seeing him move around the pocket quite a bit. Even today in practice, he hit Terrace Marshall on just like a swinging throw on the run to the right side of the end zone for a touchdown in red zone 11-on-11 drills. Honestly, the most impressive throw that he has made maybe in camp was on a short pass. Today, he targeted David Moore in between two defenders, like absolute bullet laser.
Wow.
Through traffic, touchdown, got the ball out incredibly quick. His decision-making was immediate. And I think Dave Canales has given him the type of environment to kind of work around things. Yes, his wide receivers are improved. Yes, the offensive line on paper is improved. But in theory, you're not going to be successful as a quarterback unless you're comfortable in the system and comfortable in your own cleats. And I think what's happening right now is Bryce Young is being empowered to improvise. And he can be a magician. Everybody talks about the point guard being able to distribute. Well, if you're a point guard who can only drive up to the top of the key and then have to alley-oop every single time, you're not going to be successful. If you're a point guard who just throws to, a three-point shooter and that guy's covered, you're not going to have success. But when you can kind of bring out your entire game and be this, Steve Nash style distributor, I think it helps. And I know we're crossing lines here of sports. Let's cross another line.
Wait. I thought we were going to talk about Bronny James.
No, we are not going to talk. No, it's not this next segment. We are not doing this. Let's cross another line. Let's go to the defensive side of the ball. What's your biggest takeaway? I think I know what it's going to be because of your background, but I'll throw you the microphone anyway.
Yeah, you know what it's going to be. But I don't it's obviously about this pass rushing group. Where is it? I mean,
it's in Rock Hill with a certain native of Rock Hill.
Yeah, his name is Jadeveon Clowney. It is actually kind of funny looking at these practices, and most of the pass rushing group is either on the sidelines of Amari Barno, DJ Wanham, or they're on the special team side, aka they are either going to be special team starters or they are guys that are trying to make the roster. And then it's just Jadeveon Clowney in the middle, chopping it up with his position coaches and kind of interacting with the crowd. And so, like, if that doesn't illustrate the lack of players and the lack of depth in this pass rushing team unit, I don't know what does. I think that this is the place where they need to make the most progress. Evero's system is known for being good in the pass coverage. They showed that last year. And they showed that without having a great pass rush last year. Brian Burns led the team in sacks, 7-8 sacks, something like that. So the system can be good without a great pass rush. And they're going to have to be this year because I don't know where it's coming from. If it's not coming from Jadeveon Clowney, who's 31 years old, I don't know where it's coming from, Mike. So that's my takeaway on the defensive side. What about you?
I mean, it kind of fits in that point. This is an inside-out defense.
Yep.
So you look at the interior defensive line, you look at Derek Brown, who's coming off a Pro Bowl season. You have A'Shawn Robinson, who they brought in free agency, who has a background with Evero. You talk about Shy Tuttle having a second year in the system. And then you look at the inside linebackers. Yes, Shaq Thompson is sidelined with a hamstring injury. Yes, Josie Jewell is out there making plays. He's kind of entering like the middle of his career. I've been really impressed by two rookies.
Oh, yeah.
Trevin Wallace has moved very well in space. He's a read and react style linebacker. And then Shaw Smith-Wade, who is playing nickel and outside corner. He's mostly going to be the backup nickel. He has played very well in coverage. I think Troy Hill has played very well in coverage at nickel. And then you talk about the safeties. Xavier Woods, Jordan Fuller, Nick Scott, they've all played relatively well. I think Alex Cook has done a really good job. And I say all this to say this is up the middle. Mm-hmm. You've said that Evero's defense is known for its good pass protection, but Evero is a very big believer in old school style football. Stopping the run leads to mistakes in the passing game. And so inevitably, when you bring in Clowney, who is an expert edge setter, and then you're potentially starting DJ Johnson, the third round pick, who was much maligned last year, but is a good run defender. I think the inside out thought process of this is important because when you look at the massive weaknesses of this group, it's the cornerback depth and the pass rusher depth. You have JC Horn and Jadeveon Clowney. Those are your top guys at both positions. And then from there is a steep drop off. So if you have an injury to one of those two players, you're very concerned. Moving on from those standouts and those biggest takeaways, that kind of leads us into our next segment of who is the early training camp MVP? And before you answer that question, I think you could make the case for several players.
Okay.
I think there are players that are subtly having terrific camps. There are guys that we're not going to be able to tell until really like you get into the nitty gritty of padded practice. There are guys who are phenomenal when pads aren't on. Mm-hmm. There are guys that stand out when pads are on. That's just the reality of camp. But who is your guy who doesn't matter if he's on offense, defense, special teams, if he is, changing the trash cans, who is your MVP of camp so far?
I appreciate you.
It could be the PR staff if you want. Like, you're probably not going to put them there, but I'm just saying anybody, who is your MVP of training camp so far?
His name is Jadeveon. I'm joking. Yeah. That's a joke.
It did kind of feel like that's where it was going as I looked to our producer, Zach, and smile and smirk.
I appreciate you asking me these questions and setting me up because you're giving me first takes. I don't think you say there's a lot of people who could qualify for this. I don't think so. I think it's Deontay Johnson. I think it's Deontay Johnson by a mile.
Okay.
The way that he has upgraded this wide receiver room, you see a belief. You see something that you didn't see last year, whereas, okay, we got this guy who can get open downfield. And Adam Thielen had a remarkable year last year, steady hands, over 100 receptions, over 1,000 yards receiving, but he was a slot guy. And that's not who Adam thinks he is. Adam thinks he can be much more than that. but that's how he was used in Frank Reich's system last year. They didn't have I've said this before, if you were a casual Carolina Panthers fan and you're looking at this offense, first thing you notice is, wow, the Panthers don't throw the ball down the field. And that's not good. That's not compelling.
Sure.
And Deontay Johnson gives this team that belief. And I know that's reductive in many ways because, yes, the offense doesn't just go as DJ goes, but you could just tell that there's something about he and J.C. Horn are going at it, and it's just like, and Canales has mentioned this, we look like a football team. That's what he said. I mean, the practice, he literally said in today's post-practice availability, this is how practice should feel like. And Deontay Johnson's a big reason why, I think. Mike, what about you?
I'm going to go with Chuba Hubbard, and I'll say this not from necessarily a performance standpoint, I think from a tone-setting standpoint. That dude runs hard. He is locked in. He's catching the ball well. He spends 40 to 50 minutes after practice on the jugs machine. He's setting the tone. They want to run the ball. They want a balanced offense. And, Chuba's giving them that fiber in their diet of the run. You know what I mean? Like, he is like a guy giving them a balanced breakfast. You know what I mean? I don't know why I said that, but it's just like it kind of came to me while I was saying.
You know, the saying part of a balanced breakfast is like misleading. Like, as someone you're with your PR background, you should know that.
Well, anyway.
Family history.
Anyway, so what I would say is I think Chuba Hubbard's doing a really good job of emerging as a leader on this team. Yeah. I think, listen, I don't think Bryce is much of a rah-rah guy. He's not much of a talker. And so when that happens, you need a tone setter. And I think the gateway for success in this offense, along with Deontay Johnson, who I agree with you, but for the sake of radio, we need to disagree on this. Yeah. I think that Chuba Hubbard, and I've said this before, I don't know if I've coined this or whatever, but he's a possession running back. He's the type of guy that can pick up 2, 3, 4 yards on every carry. He doesn't lose yardage very often on carries. That's really important, especially because you don't want to get down in the count, on third down. And so you want to be able to create manageable third downs. I think Chuba Hubbard can do that. I think he has pushed Miles Sanders to perform at a high level. And by the way, for the folks that are concerned about Miles Sanders, I think he's had a pretty solid camp. I wouldn't say it's been great. I think he's running the ball well. He's catching the ball well. He had a couple of drops during camp, but for the most part, I think he's looked pretty good.
And he's fired up.
Yeah, he's fired up, man. But that's for another time. I think, speaking of fired up, okay, every year, as a former draft nerd, I would get stoked about the preseason.
Current draft nerd. Well, what are we talking about?
Well, not this year, but anyway. But I would get stoked about the preseason because there's nothing more compelling to me about guys fighting for jobs they've wanted their entire lives.
Oh my gosh! Yeah.
And I think we're going to see a lot of that in camp, especially with Dave Canales coming out and saying, Bryce Young's not going to play. He said Tuesday that he has a meeting to see who's available. Whatever. I don't think you will see a lot of starters play in the week 1 opener against New England. But what I would say is testing your depth's important, especially on the offensive line and on the defensive line. They want to see what they've got. Trevin Wallace, a guy who I've brought up before, he's going to play a lot, according to Canales. Michael Barrett, their 7th-round pick, will probably play a lot. Jaden Crumedy, their 6th-round pick, will play a lot. Shaw Smith-Wade, they've got a pretty substantial rookie class. I know, draft Twitter is all about that Jalen Coker life. He's going to get a lot of playing time. But the guy that you have to hone in on is Jack Plummer, who everyone is compelled to probably call him Jake Plummer.
Yes, it's Jack.
It is Jack Plummer. He is a jack of one trade, and that is playing quarterback, and also transferring schools. But he's a guy who is kind of an all or nothing thrower. He's got a great deep ball. Intermediate accuracy has been kind of up and down. I think when you look at what he did at Louisville, it was bombs away, right? And you have to impress. A lot of people have asked me, should you be concerned about Bryce Young not throwing downfield as much as Plummer? No, not really. They have 2 separate roles. Bryce is trying to establish an offensive system, while Plummer is trying to impress as much as he can because the odds are stacked against him, because they're probably only going to keep 2 quarterbacks on the main roster, and he's trying to earn that practice squad spot and develop. And so I think that's what's compelling about this. If you followed us last preseason, you know I do stock watches. We also have our Monday and Friday newsletters that you should definitely sign up for on charlotteobserver.com. Right, Zach? Yep.
Hey,
he gave me a thumbs up there.
Hey, I would have given you a thumbs up if you said right, Alex.
I mean, you're not as compelling as Zach is because he's off camera. Because you got to use your imagination.
This is a ridiculous statement.
Anyway, so what's the big thing without knowing? You know, I pulled up the unofficial depth chart, which, by the way, is done partially by the PR staff.
Yeah,
I don't think there's any surprises there. In the first two teams. But what I would say is I'm kind of finding the tight end group compelling just because I think, you know, with Ian Thomas and Tommy Tremble sidelined, you're going to need to figure out what your depth is. So that's Felipe Franks, who's a quarterback turned tight end. That's Jordan Matthews, a former wide receiver turned tight end. That's Jacob Hollister, who I'm sure sells great polos, but also plays tight end. There's Jesper Horsted, who went to Princeton and also played on the baseball team. Sounds like a training camp feature if I've ever heard one.
Did you just side-eye me saying that I should write that?
Maybe. I mean, if you feel compelled. I'm also interested to see the deep depth of the offensive line. We've seen Brady Christensen basically move everywhere. He's like the true sixth man. And I know I'm rambling a little bit, but I do think there's some compelling things here. I think Raheem Blackshear is going to get a lot of opportunity to play. But what is your big thing you're looking for, whether it's a unit, whether it's like a strategy, whether it's the kicking competition? What's on your mind?
Well, the big thing on my mind is we're going to talk about this later about Bryce Young and should he play.
That's what you call a tease in the industry.
Yeah, no, and we'll do that in a second. But I'm going to stick to this wide receivers thing that I've been going on all podcast.
Live your life.
You mentioned the depth chart not having any surprises. For people who have been out to the practices, there is a huge surprise. His name is Devin Tompkins.
Oh, I see what you did. You lured me in with like hey, this could be like a really big surprise, but it's just a guy with a really good performance. Go ahead.
It's crazy because Mike always tells me, hey, if you have to explain a joke, it's not funny, but I just did something pretty cool, and then you had to explain it.
I'm just here to assist you.
Yeah,
I'm trying to be,
all right.
know.
Okay, but back to Devin Tompkins. He was the last guy on the depth chart.
Yeah.
If you watched these practices, Devin Thompson is cooking. He's among the fastest guys on the field at all times. In one-on-ones today, he made a move on Troy Hill that almost shook Troy out of his cleats.
I mean, I was taken aback.
Yeah,
I'll be honest with you.
It was remarkable.
My left hamstring hurts.
He's practicing with the punt team. He's done nothing but impress since he came to the team. Obviously, the Panthers signed him after training camp started. He and Dave Canales and Brad Itzig have a history together in Tampa Bay. So I don't know. I am surprised at this depth chart, and I am really curious to see how Devin Tompkins does in this preseason, if they're going to play him a lot. I'm frankly a little shocked that he's so low on the depth chart. Maybe you can shed some light on as to why, maybe, or maybe you think, hey, Alex, you're crazy. It's not that big of a deal.
Well, I think they want a guy to earn it. I mean, you go through this offseason program with like the same like 80 guys, and then there's 10 new dudes, and you want them to earn it. It's the same thing with Xavier Legette having to earn starter reps. I mean, I wouldn't panic about that just yet, right? All of these guys, they're in a competition-based system right now. They want to establish that competition. I think for me, the thing that's most compelling is the backup corners, right? I've been heavily critical of them. I think DiCaprio Boodle is running away with the top outside corner role. So. He's kind of been the fourth corner, not counting the nickel position. And then I think Shaw Smith-Wade's that fifth guy. Are they going to keep a sixth? We've got a lot of names that you might know if you follow college football. Lamar Jackson from Nebraska, Deshaun Jameson, he played at Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Those are two guys that we've seen be on the opposite end of a lot of highlight plays, and I think this is an opportunity for them to step up. I think when you look at the defensive line. Last year, Nick Thurman and LeBron Ray kind of came out of nowhere and really impressed the staff, and they played on the team all of last year. Now, whether that says anything about the depth chart or whatever, there's a guy in practice right now, TJ Smith, who is kind of showing some signs of life after putting on the pads. They seem to like him because he's getting a lot of reps with the Verse team. Claude Charlotte is another guy who was a special teams ace last year. He's going to play a little bit more at inside linebacker. The name that I think we need to remember is Iku Leota. I made a big deal about him last year. He started off on the practice squad, ended up playing. They've complimented him quite a bit. He's a guy that I think is going to draw some moments as well.
What's his injury status right now?
Right now, I mean, he practiced today, so I would assume that he
was carted off the field on Monday.
And then he came back.
Okay.
So I think it was just kind of like a precautionary thing.
Cool.
On offense, the one guy that I think is like super compelling from the standpoint of like long-term growth is Cade Mays, who's been the backup center.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I do think there's some concern about Austin Corbett from the outside. So if Austin Corbett's not ready, you want to feel compelled to, like, you feel comfortable about the center position. Cade Mays is a guy that I've been pretty fond of since he was a draft prospect. I think
you've been fond of him. You've been fond of him since he was a fullback.
Yeah. Oh man.
It's great. It was a good story. Yeah. For those who don't know, I was referencing one of Mike's good stories.
And then another name that I kind of held on to is Jatavian Sanders. I mentioned the tight end group earlier, left him out. He's a guy that has kind of started to climb now that Thomas and Tremble are kind of on the side. It is weird that there's a guy named Tommy Tremble and Ian Thomas, but at tight end. And then there's Shaq Thompson, who's also sidelined.
And then Devin Tompkins.
What are we doing? Oh my God, Zach's going to be so annoyed editing this. Another thing that we should probably bring up, it seems relevant, Eddie Pinheiro, Harrison Mevis. I don't think there's much of a competition. I think they would have liked it to be a little bit more steady. You'd save $1.8 million if you cut Pinheiro. They also know how reliant he is. It seems like Dave Canales has somewhat changed his tune on Steady Eddie. We'll see what happens in the preseason. But if you remember last year, Eddie dealt with some injury stuff, and then they had to bring in another kicker who had no shot of winning the job. Here, I think, they're going to give Mevis enough opportunity to either prove himself here or somewhere else.
100%. All right, let's talk about Bryce Young.
Let's do it.
And I'm just going to say this. I'm sure, I know for a fact. I don't know for a fact. I'm sure that you're going to disagree with me because this on the face of my argument is it's going to feel probably sophomoric and it's probably going to feel a little too obvious.
But let's hear it and decide.
Bryce Young should play. I am not okay. Let me phrase it like this. I am someone on the outside who hasn't been on an NFL staff, not in an NFL locker room. From the outside, though, and as someone who has only covered the league intensely for a year, I'm not exactly sure what the downsides of Bryce Young not playing is. Is it an injury thing? We asked Canales, hey, does the injury factor ultimately outweigh the pros of having Bryce in, of getting those reps with Austin Corbett, real live game reps, of distributing the ball, of getting back into the flow of a real game in front of like real fans? And he said, you got to be smart, but you can't play scared. Some sort of coaching colloquialism. I don't see how there is I don't really truly see how there's a benefit to not playing Bryce. Last year, he played in all 3 preseason games. Granted, they were limited. First game, he played in 3 offensive series. If you remember, he got hit a bunch, and the offensive line had like a come to Jesus meeting after the first preseason game, which was not a good omen for the rest of the year. But first game didn't go well. Second game also didn't go well, although he did string a 15-play, 62-yard drive in the second game. And then in the third game, he put together a touchdown drive for the first time of the preseason. And that's when everyone was like, okay, Bryce we saw who he could be. And I think that was really vital in his development, or at least being prepared for what the season was to come. Granted, he didn't have, not to say that led to success in the season, because it didn't, but like, who knows where the Panthers would have been if they didn't play him last year. Of course, he was a rookie last year, but I don't know. Mike, just tell me how I'm wrong, because I'm sure I am wrong. I'm sure a lot of fans.
I don't think you're wrong. I think,
but it seems too obvious to be like, why isn't Bryce playing? He didn't prove enough last year to get this Aaron Rodgers treatment. I know this is a trend across the league, so please explain to me.
Well, I mean, this might surprise you, but I don't disagree with you at all.
Oh, that's fascinating.
I don't think it's a big deal that he doesn't play in this game.
Okay.
I think, it's about being able to bring all of your, assets to the table, right? Like, they're dealing with a ton of injuries. And obviously Bryce Young, this season is really all about him. So you want to protect him at all costs. I think what's interesting is so they have the joint practices before the second preseason game. What I would do is I would have him take part in the joint practices, which a lot of coaches actually think is better than a preseason game because you can control the atmosphere to an extent. I'd have him skip the Jets game, and then I'd have him play in week 3 of the preseason and kind of get a quarter or so of playing time. I think he needs to play in the preseason. I think this whole weighing opportunity cost is really interesting, especially with Andy Dalton sidelined as well. But you're not going to know what the product is until I learned a lot about the product in the preseason. Learned, you know what I mean? And yeah, you don't want to give stuff away. You also don't want to get anybody injured. But I also think for the benefit of growth, it compels you, especially with two new assets on the offensive line and 3 new position starters, essentially. I think it's important to have that, especially in that interior. You want to be able to feel comfortable stepping up in the pocket. If you're a quarterback, you want to be comfortable making decisions. If this whole thing is like the 2.7 seconds thing, well, you're not going to be able to evaluate that until the bullets, fly.
Live, yeah.
I mean, and the, opportunity to balance the nature of contact, right? So, yeah, I mean, you've got Deontay Johnson, you've got a bunch of new offensive linemen, you have a tight end who's developing, you have some rookies all around. I think it compels them to play him. I think it's smart not to just jump to that first preseason game. Feels like a situation where anything could go wrong. And so I think it's logical to say, hey, look, this is on the road. It's their first preseason game. There are going to be a lot of guys playing that don't know what they're doing. That's part of it too, is not only is the talent level decreased for most of preseason games, it's a lot of guys that don't know what the heck they're doing, right? The NFL is a different game than college in general senses. And so I think you worry about guys being overzealous, potentially hitting harder than they normally would because their adrenaline's up and they're not used to it. And so I think that's the concern. But that said, I think they should play him. And you know what I think you should do if you're enjoying this podcast? I think you should like and subscribe to us on YouTube. You should download us wherever you get your podcast. And I think, Alex, you should send us away from here.
Yes, thanks everyone for listening. As always, y'all know the drill. YouTube, click that bell button, whatever it is, subscribe to us, subscribe to the charlotteobserver.com. And of course, keep your Spotify on Processing Blue if you enjoy what you hear. Thanks so much. Stay creative and keep processing.